One, two, 1, 2. Single wide salute. I'm Lord Maitreya, the hip hop futurist. You're now tuned into the Super Longevity Institute podcast. Today at the Institute, I have a great guest. He is an American clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. He held a fellowship in clinical psychopharmacology research at the University of California, San Diego, and was a professor of psychiatry for 11 years at the University of New Mexico. He was the first person in the United States to undertake human research with psychedelic hallucinogenics substances, with his research on dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT. He is the author of several books. DMT, the Spirit Molecule, which summarizes his academic research into DMT and other experimental studies of it, and includes his own reflections and conclusions based on his research. In the Paths to Outer Space, journeys to alien worlds through psychedelics and other spiritual technologies. DMT and the Prophecy, a new science of spiritual revelation in the Hebrew Bible. And Joseph Levy escapes death. Ladies and gentlemen, hip hop futurist transhumanist worldwide, Dr. Rick Strassman. Welcome to the Institute. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Let me ask you, what I seen that you also studied zoology. How how did you get from studying zoology to wanting to get into studying dimethyltryptamine and psychedelic substances? I was like curious, like how did you what first exposed you to ayahuasca and DMT?
Well, the reason I was a zoology major was because I needed to declare one in college. I started off in college as a chemistry major because I liked bombs and I liked fireworks. And when I went to college, I thought I would study to start my own line of fireworks. But I was discouraged from that career path, and everybody told me I should go to medical school. So the college I was going to at the time did not have a biology major. If you wanted to be pre-med, you had to be a zoology major. So I did major as zoology. As a junior, I transferred to another college, and they had a biology major, so I was a biology major. They were both to do pre-med. I wanted to go to medical school, and there are certain requirements called pre-med. So it was either zoology in that school or the same classes, pretty much.
Oh, okay. Wow. Thanks for explaining that. What was your first experience with ayahuasca? When is the first time you took ayahuasca, and when did you first been exposed to it? Like as far as just knowing about it.
My first exposure to DMT, which is the visionary chemical in ayahuasca, was 1986, I think, maybe 1987. And I was living in New Mexico, and I then tried ayahuasca for I don't know, maybe 1989, a few years later. And it was a Peruvian shaman that came up when I've gone to Peru, met this ayahuasca shaman, and he invited Santa Fe. So the first experience was not that much. It wasn't that, and I think I experienced 3 sessions with him over the space of a year or two, and it just was never very strong. So it wasn't until I had some experiences with the church up in Santa Fe. It's one of the only ayahuasca churches in the U.S. And one of them is in Santa Fe, just a few hours from here.
Wow.
So I experienced ayahuasca, with them
Hmm.
in their church ceremonies, and full deal. When was that? Not that long ago, maybe 2015, 2014.
Um, you knew Terrence McKinney too, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. I met Terrence in 1986, and my first experience with DMT was supervised. He gave it to me and sat for me.
That's incredible. What was his interest giving you that experience with DMT? Why did he wanted you? Why? Because obviously he was probably taking it before he gave it to you. But what was your talks like? Why did he want? Why did he feel like it was so important?
Um, was the end result of biology of spiritual experience. I've always wondered, or I'm in college anyway. I started wondering what's going on in the brain when you have and that led me to the pineal gland, and then I became interested in DMT, and I was at a conference, giving I was giving a lecture on the pineal gland and on DMT, and Terrence was in the audience. So Terrence said, "Well, you're," he said, "If you're talking about DMT, some experience with it." So he said, "You want to smoke some DMT later tonight?" Oh, I did.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow. Um, what did you see? What was your experience like? And how long did the experience? How
Well,
long did it last?
it changed my life. In the space of a half hour, my life was transformed. It was a very strange moment, coming. Um, when you smoke it, it starts off very quickly. Lay down, you close your eyes, and you leave your body. It's a very strange thing. You lose awareness of your body, and you enter into this world of light. And in my case, I beheld this flaming waterfall, flaming colors, a waterfall made out of flaming colors. Must have been 20, 30 feet high. And then these little beings, 3 to 4 feet tall, they looked like aliens, like the space aged aliens. About a hand of them waterfall, and they looked at me and I looked at them, and they said to me, "Now do you see? Now do you see?" Like I'm again. And if I could have still moved, my expression would have been something along the lines of, um, they repeated this over and over for 2-3 minutes maybe, and to fade away, disappear back into the waterfall. And my eyes, and you know said to myself, people around, what was that experience? It was the most intense. It was the most intense encounter with anything uh, and that question has kind of stuck with me for
Mm,
34, 33 years. Now do you see? It's a great question.
it is a great question, and a lot of thoughts come to my mind when you said, "Now that you see it." Just reminds me of the painting that Alex Gray did on your book for Spirit Molecule with all those eyes. It just that I don't know why I think of that when you said that, but um, so you guys inhaled it. The shamans they brew it too, right? You can take it more than one way.
Um, yeah, in terms of ayahuasca, you drink ayahuasca. It's a brew. It contains and also another compound that allows the DMT to work. If you swallow it, it makes it orally active. If you just swallow pure DMT, there's no effect. You inhibit the enzyme that breaks down DMT. And ayahuasca, contains the plant that is the enzyme inhibitor. So it allows DMT to be orally active. You can smoke DMT. You can in your arm or in a vein. Obviously, it needs to be super pure pharmaceutical grade. You can snort it. You can snort DMT. So yeah, there's a number of ways to drug, although you can't, take it orally.
Wow. Does it come from? I seen that it came from serotonin and melatonin. Um, is that the
Oh,
cause? Yeah.
yeah. One more thing about the eyes, and now do you see, and you're thinking about the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so, seeing is usually well, seeing is often times used in the sense of understanding. Now do you understand? Now do you understand? But because of the visual, the our vision, the sense of vision, um, in encompasses more than simply input visually. It includes understanding something.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a recurrent theme in spiritual art is the presence of eyes. Some of the angels that Ezekiel witnessed in his visions possessed wings, and there are lots of eyes on the wings.
Mm.
Eyes are a common theme. Yeah, well, so DMT is a chemical cousin and of melatonin. They're structurally quite similar. Their pharmacology. Those chemical diagrams with
Yeah.
squares and hexagons, things like that. That's called the structure
Right.
of the structure of melatonin and serotonin are quite similar.
Mm-hmm.
Their activities are quite different, though. Melatonin, uh, causes you to be sleepy, and it has, reproductive effects. Serotonin, regulates mood, and DMT is a, own psychedelic drug. So even though their chemical structures are, similar,
Mm-hmm.
they have quite different effects.
You know what? I always wondered how did the shaman Amazon people figure out how to block like what that how do they find an enzyme to help block um keep the liver from from the drug to go in the liver so it can actually be effective. I hope I'm saying that right. You know what I'm trying to say? Like all the species of plants, how do they find DMT and how do they find an enzyme to help digest the DMT? That's amazing. Like how did they just stumbled on that? Like how did they do that?
Yeah, well, the chances of stumbling on it would be like one out of a one out of a trillion.
Yeah, amazing.
So it was not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Well, if you ask them, they will tell you that the plants told them. The plants them, and they said, combine us, mix me with that guy there, and we'll show you things that you normally don't see.
Wow.
I've heard a more sophisticated, not sophisticated, but more specific explanation.
Mm.
There's in ayahuasca, one of the plants is a vine, and the other is a shrub of the DMT, and the vine contains the enzyme inhibitor, and apparently very popular drug, very popular plant. So if you take it, you become more sensitive to all other plants. It's kind of like general amplifier of your sensitivity to other plants. So you combine anything that you see, that mother plant, as it were, and you'll notice a lot more effects. Still, the combination is unlikely coincidence. So it must have been that both plants involved in communicating the power of their being combined.
Wow, it's just amazing. I also back. This was like 15 years ago. I read a book called, I think it was The Cosmic Serpent by James Norby. We sold so many of those books, and we sold so many of the Spirit Molecule at East West Books. People love those two. And I also bought uh what's it called, the In the Journeys to Outer Space book. Also, I definitely have that in my library, and I was like amazed. Um, what do you think? People, why do you think so many people see alien entities? And another thing that really astounds me is, why do they see geometric shapes? Like, that's, to me, that's like a confirmation or something. To me, in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what does that confirm for you?
I mean, when you study a lot of the alchemists and stuff, like the when you geometry just seems like so important. There's so many of the masons and stuff like that. They were so big into geometry, and just the esoteric thought that you always read about geometry being so important. So that's why I was just like,
Yeah,
there was something to that.
yeah. And if you look at if you look at Islamic art, and if you look at ayahuasca art, ayahuasca art and Islamic art are very geometric.
Mm.
Lots of right angles. Um, the geometric vision, mostly the brain. DMT interacting with of the brain. Yeah, kind of like your eyes. When your eyes are, you'll see flashes of light.
Yeah.
Phosphenes. Those are called phosphenes.
Mm.
So I think DMT and other psychedelics kind of stimulate the part of the possible for geometric patterns and colors.
Mm.
The other question is the beings, the entities. What are those, and why do so many people see them? And it's a big question. I can give you some ideas. I think that one of the things that occur when you take a psychedelic, especially DMT, you are aware of new things. There's more information that you're aware of. You're being communicated ideas and knowledge, data.
Mm.
And for most of us, that information needs to be visible. We just can't hear it.
Yeah.
We need to, and you feel it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that the entities are a way of uh, you know, packaging information.
Mm.
So you interact with those, and the beings interact with you,
Mm.
and you learn certain things. Uh, because it needs to take some kind of form that you can recognize.
Mm.
Um, it could be smell or sense of smell, but visually, humans are visual animals, and we learn things mostly through visual perception.
Right.
So I have visions on DMT. That's it's chemistry. and is packaged in the visions. And then you need to figure out what their what the content is, what is the information in the vision. So anybody that experiences something new, likely to be represented by a being in the DMT state.
Wow.
The clothes of the message.
Wow. How did you get the government to okay this research? That's hard to do. I was thinking to myself, how did Dr. Strassman get them to say, yeah, you could go and study DMT?
Right.
I was like, they wasn't just get. That's I knew that had to be hard. Like, what was the story behind that? Like, how did you get that done?
Well, I started my study during the war on drugs, and the war on drugs paid for my study. And it was during of the first President Bush, George Bush or something. Yeah. So it is evidence that you can make lemonade out of a lemon. I mean, people wanted to understand psychedelic. It was a exploding area of interest in psychiatry. Huge. Everybody was studying psychedelics in the 50s and 60s in psychiatry. And then they escaped the laboratory, and there was an adverse effects, and they were taken. Yeah, you couldn't do any human studies with them anymore. They're just too dangerous. But in the meantime, there was animal data. There were animal studies with drugs like LSD, and a lot of serotonin information was discovered during the intervening 20 years. So the rationale for my study was kind of three prong reasons that I requested permission to do my study. One is it is a psychedelic drug. It's the simplest, shortest acting of the psychedelic drugs, and I kind of referred to public health concerns. People still take LSD. We don't really know what these drugs are doing, and there's a lot of it we need to confirm or contradict in terms of understanding drugs that have some public health importance. The second rationale was that in the first wave of studies with psychedelics in the 50s and 60s, there was interest in DMT causing schizophrenia. The brain makes DMT. And back in the day, there was a theory that schizophrenia, that there was a body in the psychotic brain. So there's a lot of interest in using DMT to understand schizophrenia. Maybe you could develop a drug that blocked DMT, prove the symptoms of schizophrenia. So I uncovered that old theory, or brought it up to consideration again. Understand about DMT, the biology of it, we might understand more about schizophrenia.
Oh my gosh.
That was rationale number two.
Yeah.
The third rationale was, these are very interesting, but I studied them in 20 years, and we ought to get, back on track. I mean, there's no reason these drugs can't be studied. I said, I want to study it. And, so, we developed a questionnaire. We developed a way of measuring blood DMT. We recruited volunteers, so, just a study, like this in and of itself was important. The three, rationales. So drug abuse, psychosis, and science,
Whoa.
and those were three very strong, and I was able to support the arguments with a lot of data and a lot of reference. So it was just the government wanted to fund for all three of those reasons. So they funded me first time around for both of my grants from the government.
Wow. And this, see, you just answered my question because I was talking to my older uncle today and I said, yeah, I got Dr. Strassman on the show. I was excited. I said, man, I had this book for like 15 years. Do you know how much, you know how happy I am to have him on? I said, and so I told him which your study and stuff. And he's an older guy. He doesn't watch YouTube or no, he does watch YouTube a little bit, but he didn't even know nothing about the study. And when I asked him, he said, you know what? Ask Dr. Strassman the correlation between schizophrenia and DMT. I said, I'm gonna ask my Uncle Phil asked me to ask you that, and you already answered that. You already had this in your mind, and this is how you got your funding. So it's amazing. He just came up with it. And I was like, you know what? That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, like because I was thinking that if I was talking to him a little more. And he was thinking that if maybe people with schizophrenia have more DMT going off in their brains than normal. That's what he was thinking. He blew me away this morning with that. I said, I'm going to ask Dr. Strassman.
Yeah, sophisticated and intelligent question. Yeah. So that was a theory of schizophrenia. Back in the 60s, and it's still that theory still has got some life. A German group is interested in it and gave DMT to volunteers. This was 2005 about, and they gave schizophrenia rating scales to the normal guy DMT, and the psychosis rating scale were quite high.
Whoa.
They were given DMT. These were normal volunteers. So there still is some interest. That theory.
Wow.
Well, DMT studied anywhere as much. The brain makes DMT, which is a very strange thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't people looking at DMT? It's a very intense psychedelic that the human brain makes. And the levels are pretty high. They're as high as the levels in the brain of dopamine and of serotonin. So there may be enough DMT to qualify as a neurotransmitter like serotonin or dopamine. So what in the world is a DMT neurotransmitter system doing in the human brain? I mean, that's a question that a lot more people ought to be looking into.
Right. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Oh, that's what I want to ask you. So, what about the premise that DMT is more prevalent in the brain during death or right before death? Is there strong even more evidence of that? How can you even do a study to figure that out anyway? Like me being a layman, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, sure. Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question, and it was one of the ideas that I had, going into my DMT study. I believe that DMT increased in thing, and if giving DMT to my volunteers, replicated, produced the same kinds of effects as the near-death experience, that would support a role for naturally DMT in the visions that occur as you're dying. But only one of our volunteers had what you'd say would be a class death experience. Going through the tunnel and a light at the end of the tunnel. It doesn't say review in this volunteer that got DMT, but there were a couple features in her experience of DMT that were similar to what might be expected DEE, near-death experience. There was a study in London, in England, a few years ago, which gave questionnaires to people, that had a, NDE, like a, cardiac arrest. They gave, this group, and, they gave another group, questionnaires, or, the same, questionnaires that had smoked DMT. So there were, two groups of people, like a real NDE, and, the other, that had just smoked DMT. And they compared the answers from the two quite similar. So that supported an idea that NDE and the DMT experience are quite similar. That came out about 2 years ago from the University in Ann Arbor, where they looked at levels of T in the dying rodent. They caused a cardiac arrest, and then measured levels of DMT in the brain. Actions went up quite a bit. The most up were in the visual cortex. So that's a very interesting. If you kill an animal, God forbid, and it's a sad thing. Looking at the brain of a dying animal, the increase in the visual cortex, which you stimulating in the animal or in a human if a comparable thing takes place. So there is evidence. DMT increases at death, and DMT is extremely. The NDE is quite visual. So perhaps some of the visual characteristics of the NDE are being mediated or controlled, by elevations of DMT in those brain areas that are responding. A real study or a more careful study would be people that had an NDE, and then give them them to compare the two states.
Right.
Or if somebody has smoked DMT and this and had an NDE, compare the types of experiences in the same person, which would be the best way to do it. A few people have emailed me, that either first had an DMT like a number of years later, or had smoked and then got into an accident. And it's a mixed. People describe them as similar. Some people different. They've gotten like a dozen emails from people describe those those events. So it isn't a large number of emails I've gotten, but it wouldn't be that difficult to study. There are societies of NDEers out there, and just give them DMT. It'd be pretty simple. But so far nobody's done that.
Yeah. Would you be if you had the funding? Would you be interested in doing that? If they said, "Here, Dr. Strassman, here's the funding," would you go ahead and conduct that study? Cause I gotta see that. I want to see that. Maybe I'm being a little selfish. I want to see that myself.
Yeah. Well, if you gave me that money, I would find somebody to do that study.
Okay.
My days of giving drugs and writing grants and asking for permissions kind of behind me, but I'm still a good find a junior person or somebody at a university, let's say, that could do that. It would be an easy study. Yale study right now giving DMT for depression. So Yale could do that study. They've got the DMT, all the permits, the funding, to do DMT related study. The only DMT study in the U.S. right now, anyway.
Do you think that people's spiritual beliefs are reflected in their ayahuasca experience? Like, if they're Christian, do they see Christian images also? I'm curious on that.
Well, I think it's more general than just specifically spiritual beliefs.
Mm.
I think it's the whole it's it's all of the beliefs. It's every one of their beliefs. Their psychology, their personality. So they could be um, Christian. They could consider themselves Christian. They may have studied the Bible very carefully, but still, as part of who they are, they're also fascinated by Buddhism, and they've been reading some things about Buddhism, and they drink ayahuasca, and instead of Christian imagery and Christian ideas, lo and behold, there are these Buddhist ideas, Buddhist notions and concepts, Buddhist visions. So it isn't as if it would be a big surprise if you took into account totality, the sum total of what made her the way that she is. It would be no more than just being Christian. It would be her thinking about ideas which are contained in, like impermanence, the lack of an abiding, self, those kinds of things. So you can start, thinking about those things without being a Buddhist. But when you drink ayahuasca, things that you were not sure about can really come and be, the answer. It seems surprising, but when you think about it, really, because the ayahuasca is working on the totality of their spiritual beliefs. It is all of their beliefs, everything that's in their lives. Their hope, their fears, and their health, and all those things. So, so I think ayahuasca or other, psychedelics just, and amplify what's already in your mind. Who you already are, things clearer, and amplifies them in a way that's brand new and can be quite, it can completely reorient your life.
Wow.
To the extent that you never seriously, considered certain things, but now by how true they are now, to you, you have to pay attention, and you're.
Wow. Yeah, a couple. I'm a life extensionist also, and a lot of people that in the life extension community watches this show, and they heard of you. So, we have a gentleman in our community. His name is Dr. Spiegel. Um, he's a lawyer also. He took ayahuasca, and he was on the show, and he told his experience, and I told him about you. He said, "Yeah, I'm gonna be watching." He said, "Yeah, he's definitely gonna be watching." So there's a lot of people in the life extension community that have heard of you, and some people didn't hear of you. So this will be an interesting show for them. Let me ask. Oh yeah, what was the Buddhist so afraid of? I mean, I heard you speak about this. What were they afraid of? This is new information. This is information confirming all of the data is confirming what they already probably knew. In my eyes.
Right, I know.
Yeah, that's weird.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, it was hype. But let's get back to your question about longevity.
Yeah.
Um, so DMT and probably all of the psychedelics stimulate and neuroplasticity, like the growth of new nerve cells in the brain,
Wow.
neurogenesis, uh, a number of nerve cells in your brain. DMT does, psilocybin does.
Wow.
And they also increase neuroplasticity, means the interconnectedness among neurons. There's lots more connections to many more neurons.
Mm-hmm.
If these drugs are brain food, it's a very strange notion, but they seem to stimulate the growth of new neurons that
Wow.
are more complexly interrelated to other ones.
Wow.
So there is microdosing out there, which may produce genesis even without a psychedelic effect. They're developing new
Wow.
compounds that are like psychedelics, or you can give a typical psychedelic at a lower dose than cause the mental changes, and you would still be stimulating the brain. So it turned out to be one of the ways that microdosing is helpful. Or you can have a larger dose, it seems like maybe just once, and you've got those neurostimulatory. Um, that's what happens with ketamine. You give ketamine once in a depressed person, and they become less depressed within an hour or two.
Wow.
So it could be that the same thing is going. In other words, the activation starts within an hour after you give ketamine. So the same thing could be going on with the classical psychedelics, and it might only require one dose,
Wow.
rather than daily dose.
Wow. That's amazing. This is some powerful medicine. How do you think? Do you think that ayahuasca slash DMT will be legalized officially in America? And what steps do we need to take in order for that to happen? Because this ayahuasca and DMT just seems so important to humanity as a whole. I think that there needs to be a fresh new look, and I know this has been your work for so long, like a fresh new outlook on psychedelics and their use for the progress of humanity. What do you think about that?
Um, well, you can use ayahuasca with those, two federally protected churches, but that's a very very small people.
Right.
Um, there have been a handful of cities which have decriminalized in Oakland, in Portland, Colorado, or Denver, Colorado. You know, so these substances or plants or drugs or whatever, can be used legally in those local jurisdictions. Federal law still trumps local law. So even though you're not going to be prosecuted locally, you still could be federally. So
Mm.
well, so there's a lot of interest in psychedelics to treat especially depression,
Wow.
and if that's going to be popularized and made publicly widely available, it'll need to be descheduled. Right now, schedule one. You could reschedule it to 2 or 4, and you could then prescribe it,
Wow.
in specially licensed settings. Um, but that hasn't happened yet. Being debated. FDA has emergency youth emergency use
Mm.
um,
Wow.
to psilocybin, for depression. So rescheduling probably will occur in the next 3 years at the most. Federally, I don't think will occur for a long, long time with the psychedelics, ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin, LSD. You were asking about, that's an interesting tea book. I studying with this Buddhist group when I was old, 1974. And, there were a lot of young monks at the monastery, Anglo monks. They were all, many of them Jewish. There weren't any Asians. There were no, Black Hispanics. Yeah. But I was, very curious. I was 22. I was, thinking these, Buddhism, psychedelic brain chemistry kind of stuff. And every chance that, that I got speaking with just, one-to-one with any of the monks, I would ask them, before you became a monk, did you take LSD? All said yes. And, then I asked them, well, how important LSD to becoming a monk? And they all said, we wouldn't have become monks if it weren't for LSD. So, they got their first flash of enlightenment, what in Buddhism is called, Bodhi, the thought of enlightenment. First flash of enlightenment, it was possible to be enlightened. The first flash of that realization happened to them as a result. They were on LSD and they, perceived an entirely different way of viewing the world. And then they discovered Buddhism, and they felt that there was a consistency and what was a very well-defined, time-tested manner in Buddhism. So they were that they could extend and apply and evolve and grow their flash that they got on LSD within a monastic community, meditating, working, apprenticing, those kinds of practices. So they were quite supportive. 20s, we were all in our 20s. I was a layman, they were monks, and we would talk about drugs, and and they were quite supportive of my DMT work. I started doing it. Theoretically, it was great. Yeah, that makes sense. But once I started doing it, it got a little more tense. Because I could start speaking and I could start, writing about, DMT made in the brain, maybe it's involved with enlightenment, and perhaps there's a connection between Buddhist practice and experience and what happens on the psychedelic, drug state. And they were all in their 40s and 50s, and it was institutional with like a really strict hierarchy and adherence to doctrine. It was much less freewheeling than it had been. And so once I started writing a Buddhist journal called Tricycle, it stands. So I wrote an article for their special issue on psychedelics and Buddhism in 1995, and the shit hit the fan. The monks.
Tricycles did that. I love that.
The monastery. Yeah, it's a flagship popular Buddhist magazine. So the monastery went crazy. They said, Strassman's lost his mind. He's, spouting heresy. This is the most un-Buddhist thing imaginable. And foul. You guys have been supporting me all these years. Why are you reacting this way. And, like I was kind of, what's the word, excommunicated,
Whoa.
which was fine because it let me start studying Judaism again.
Wonderful.
And, who needs those hypocrites?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you continue. Yeah. It seems like when you're doing great work and you're pioneering something, all the pioneers go through. Everybody who pioneers something, they always go through that type of bump in the road. But I'm glad you continue, man, because it definitely had a great impact. When I first read your book, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is my second copy, by the way. This is not my first copy. This is my second copy." So I was like, "Oh my gosh." I was like, "This is amazing." I couldn't keep a book. I kept giving them out. I said, "Yo, you gotta read this." I kept having to buy one for myself. But man, um, hold on. Let me just. I got a couple of other notes, man. I gotta get to this. Oh, what part of the Hebrew Bible correlates with your, DMT and ayahuasca? I gotta ask. I want to know specifically about that. Since you back doing practicing Judaism, I would love to hear the correlation between the two because I know the Kabbalah is definitely part of esoteric um it's part of the esoteric tradition, and I know that a lot of people who study Judaism, they also know about the Kabbalah.
Right. Excuse me. Well, so this isn't live, is it? You're recording?
No.
Yeah. Can you give me a couple of minutes to
Of
make a
course.
bathroom break?
Sure. Yeah, this is going great, y'all. Whoa. I mean, I didn't know. When I first started doing this, I didn't even know. When my uncle hitting me with that question, my uncle Phil hit me with that question. I said, "Wow, this guy's a genius." I said, "I can't believe he even thought of that on the spot like that." I said, "I gotta ask Dr. Strassman about the correlation between schizophrenia and DMT," and he said that that was in his mind about when he was getting before he was getting funded. That amazed me. Let me show you the book again. Why he takes a bathroom break. That's how it looks. Alex Gray, you did your thing, B. As a person, I'm an artist. Everyone knows I'm an artist. If you don't know, I'm an artist. I'm a hip hopper. I love to see cover art, and Alex Gray laced him for the Spirit Molecule. He laced him. That was an ill. The cover just spoke volumes. It was so powerful. Alex Gray is a great artist who paints what he sees when he's underneath the when he takes ayahuasca and DMT. So yeah, it's a snowy day today. I can't picture a better way to to do a better time. I couldn't picture a better way to a better time to do this. Snowy outside. I'm indoors. It's kind of messy. This is a wonderful way to spend my time talking to Dr. Strassman at the Super Longevity Institute. Shout out to Dr. Paul Spiegel. I know you'll be watching. Shout out to my Uncle Phil, who was brilliant enough to even give me that question to ask. And you see that ayahuasca and DMT is a good is probably good for mental health and life extension, growing new neurons. That's crazy. That's crazy. Let me look through here. I got other questions. Let me see. Let me look through here. Yeah, we get into it. We get into it, people. Yeah, I think I hit a lot of my points. I think I'm doing pretty good. I think I got most of my questions answered. This is wonderful, people. And Dr. Strassman is back. Um, take a sip of my green tea. Yeah. It's it's um, it's it's incredible that early on. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's incredible that early on, you were talking about the pineal gland, and I was also interested as a young man about the pineal gland being the third eye, and it's in school we learned that Rene Descartes talked about it. Um, so I was definitely interested, and then I was interested in Hinduism. They spoke about it, yoga. They spoke about the third eye and the pineal gland. So it makes sense that one would look there for one of the places that will be looked as being able that secretes DMT would be the pineal gland. So so you must have been into yoga and stuff like that early on. When did you learn about the pineal gland? The pineal gland, excuse me.
I learned about the pine summer of 1972.
Mm.
Well, so have you heard of a psychologist, Jim Fadiman? He's written the Psychedelic Guide. He's kind of the father of microdosing.
No, I never heard of him.
So I was Jim Fadiman, yeah, Fadiman. He's a great guy. He's been a mentor of mine for 48 years.
Wow.
So, well, I was at Stanford at the time.
Mm.
I was doing research, cell biology research, the chicken nervous system, and I reading about Buddhism for a class I was taking the next year. I got all the books that I was going to read the first quarter of the next year, during the summer, and I read them all, or at least most of them. And some of them were brain physiology, and some were Buddhism. Stanford is an amazing university. So in the you know, 70s, they were teaching classes on brain chemistry and Buddhism. Interesting.
Wow.
So I took those classes. I started developing my theories about the biological experience. But I interested in going to medical school. I wanted to solve the mysteries of the so I was a little confused, and I went to student health. The psychiatrist at student health at Stanford, and I'm going on, and he says to me, "You should meet Jim Fadiman." So I thought, okay, who's Jim? Well, Jim, was doing creativity research with LSD at Stanford at the time in the early 70s. And, Jim was pretty out there as a grad student, and was, working in the engineering at Stanford. He's said to me, these engineer guys, can they create, are creative? So, he was teaching creativity, to the engineer. And, Jim Fadiman, and I went to his office, and I'm talking to him. And he said to me, have you ever heard of the pineal? I think I was 20 years old. And I said, the pineal gland. And he said, yeah, that's light. And, the Hindus and the Kabbalists put a lot of stock in the importance of the pineal gland. The Masons, the Vatican. So he said, look into the pineal gland. My first introduction to the pineal gland.
Wow. Okay, so now I guess I can go into the connection between the Hebrew Bible and Ayahuasca
right.
DMT spirits.
Right. Yeah, well, my interests in doing my my DMT study were as much spiritual as they were pharmacological. And I kind of maxed out on the pharmacology. Like, okay, we know what DMT is doing in the brain, at least up until that time with the state of the art tools. Um, so I then, turned my interest to the spiritual, properties of the psychedelics. The kind of peak experience that both the volunteers and I expected them to have was the enlightenment like experience, just, dissolving into the white light, no
Right.
time, no space, no personality, no self. But, no, only one out of 5 dozen volunteers had that kind of experience. Everybody else's experience was, full of content. There were visions and voices and interacting and communication. It was the complete opposite of an enlightenment experience. So, Buddhism, wasn't that relevant to the effects that the DMT volunteers had. Shamanism is close or closer. Number one, they accept, the reality of the world of the visions, which is one of their most striking properties is, how real the visions seem. So, shamanism, believes in, the reality of the visions. You sell a larger, West, than perhaps a, Western tradition, a Western spiritual tradition, one that, uses, terms that, that we're, familiar with, institutions that, we're with, books, the Bible, etc. So I then, well, I began to read the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, for 2 reasons. One was I was without a spiritual, home at that point, 1996 or so. And I had been working under them or studying under them, training under their supervision for a long time, over 20 years. So I was, kind of depressed and like, where's my spiritual home? So
Right.
I figured, well, I was raised Jewish. I should just, see if there's anything in the Bible. At the same time, I was interested in the Jewish model of spirituality, um, a sophisticated one,
Mm.
not a So I started, reading the Hebrew Bible along with, the commentaries, which are written by people, from the Middle Ages, explaining. It's very hard to read the Bible. You need to help you translate what's going on, to explain what's going on. And as I worked my way through the Bible, I started to visualize what the Jewish biblical spiritual experience is. Is it enlightenment like? What is it like? Um, and it's very DMT like, at least superficially.
Right.
The voices are the same, the physical feelings, the appreciation of the power of what you're interacting with. So all of that, all of this are shared with the spiritual experience, which is the prophetic experience and the experience of DMT. So I enlarged my definition of prophecy to include any spiritual experience under the text undergoes. It could be a vision that comes true. It could be flight through space. It could be foretelling the future. It could be speaking with an angel. It could be unusual courage that seems kind of out of the blue. So all of so it isn't only predicting and foretelling; it's any spiritual experience. Bible. If you compare the things that occur during spiritual experiences and what occurs in the DMT, they overlap quite strongly. So I developed a theory of why that might be the case, and it boils down to DMT uh, is or is the mechanism through which you experience the the visions of the prophetic state. But the source of the visions, the source of the stimulation of DMT is from above. It's spiritual, it's divine,
Wow.
God. So there's energy going into your head, so to speak. You have elevated DMT, which results in visions. But the information contained in those visions is due to divine influence. So then you need to use your mind, your intellect, the rational part of your mind that works in words to extract information from those visions,
Wow.
and then that is the prophetic message,
Mm.
which is into the visions, which contain the could be mediated by DMT.
Mm.
Increases in DMT, which are stimulated above, from God, maybe. So,
Wow.
um, if you think about as a prophetic text, it's a text, prophecy, a record of prophetic experience. So if it's a change prophetic book, and if using of a psychedelic or medium dose, but just using them judiciously, preparation, care, caution, respect, all those things, you can enter into a state of mind
Mm.
which resembles in some ways the state of mind responsible for the book.
Right.
So you resonate more closely with the contents of the book
Mm.
because your mind is more attuned to the information, the reception of information responsible for the book. So it's a way of grounding your psychedelic experience. It keeps you grounded, and it's a way to integrate experiences. You're beginning to see them through a prophetic biblical lens.
Mm.
So mystical experiences and inner peace. You have prophetic experiences and world peace. Because that's experience is world peace is what we need to be seeking.
Right.
So that is a different perspective or different priority than the at peace. Everything is good. That's not the prophetic message. The prophetic message is things are bad, and things are bad because of the way that people are.
Right.
And if you want world peace, people need to change.
That's right.
So it's a completely different model. It comes at it from a completely different
Wow.
perspective.
Wow.
And one's not better. I wish I were calmer. I wish my meditation had been more effective. But yeah, I think one isn't any better than the other. But I
Right.
think the alternative,
That's right.
you know, the perspective ought to be out there as an
Mm.
alternative to the inner peace and all as one. Those kinds of priorities.
Wow. I totally agree, and I really appreciate all your years of work of bringing all this information about DMT and ayahuasca. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you too. The Spirit Molecule. I watched it for the first time the other day because I don't really watch YouTube that often, even though I'm on YouTube. It's strange. But I listen. Well, when I do look at YouTube, it's just music playing. But I seen it and I was like, wow, how did you? I seen Joe Rogan on it. And I was like, how did you meet Joe Rogan? How did he get interested in ayahuasca? And also, how did you meet Alice Gray?
Well, let's see. I learned about Joe because when I first got it was quite a while back, and emails from people saying, "Do you know Joe Rogan? He's talking about him and your book."
Yeah,
And this was a long time ago. I think he was just starting his podcast,
yeah,
or he may have been just starting his podcast.
wow,
And I got his phone number, or I emailed him, or I got his phone number, from somebody.
mm,
But I called him, and he answers, and he's at the airport, and he said, "Hey, man, I'm reading your book. I'm showing it to people." So I said,
that's
"Great."
great.
Uh, yeah, so I got to know him, and then when we were thinking about a narrator, for the DMT film, we thought, who is popular, who has a wide demographic.
Mm,
He could draw on the most people that's interested in DMT, and it's like, oh, Joe Rogan, of course.
yes,
Yeah, so we asked him, and he said yeah. So I think he's been really publicizing the existence and the nature of DMT. I'm Alex Gray. Man, well, we're friends, me and Alex and Alex. When did I meet him first, though? You know, we met. I'm at a event, like one of these, book, rave, electronic dance music, visual art kind of event. And I was at one of them, and yeah, they're great fun. Yeah, booths and things. Yeah, so yeah, I met Allison, and but we had been in years.
mm,
Um, I think when I was looking for cover art for the DMT book, I had one that captured what it's like to see somebody on DMT,
mm,
and down at people a lot, and they look dead on the high dose of DMT. It was a very strange thing, but it was the most striking part of a big DMT experience in the
wow,
hospital, is somebody just lying there looking dead.
wow,
And I was experiencing somewhat of a contact high at the
mm,
same time, and things were kind of shimmery around the edges,
wow,
feeling of some elation. Yeah, so I thought, well, I wonder if Alex Gray's got something like that. And there's this painting which is called Dying or Death. I'm not sure,
wow,
and it captured of what people look like. So I emailed him or my publisher. I'm not sure, and if he would grant us permission to use.
wow,
Yeah, and he did. And we became internet friends after that. Then we met a few years later.
wow. This was a great interview. I had fun. Um, and I think I said Peter Spiegel. That was the Lord. It's Paul Spiegel. Sorry, Paul. I'm just nervous. I got Dr. Strassman over here. But this was very fun. You answered so many of my questions that I've had so long, and I'm really thankful for you coming on the show. I could talk to you for another hour easily, but I gotta cut it short. Is it anything you want to leave us with, my audience, with the hip hop generation and the transhumanists, like what and the futurists that look at my show? Anything you would, any last words you want to leave us with?
Well, I guess or to be continued words. Keep an eye out for new findings regarding DMT.
Yeah.
Your local congressperson to fund more DMT research.
Yeah.
The other is don't overlook the Bible as a
Mm,
source of spiritual inspiration, and for psychedelic trips.
mm,
The longevity transhumanist demographic. I think would be interested, the biology, but to the extent that they're interested in the spiritual, shamanism isn't the only answer. The East isn't the only answer. I think the West has got its own tradition.
That's I couldn't ended it better. We're out, and we hope to have Dr. Strassman here again. Peace.
Well, thanks, Lord Maitreya.